However, the size of parlors, a parlor is just a room in a person's house, right? So it's this limited domestic space. It really prohibited the types of grand performances that composers like Berlioz were staging in large concert halls. Chopin and other composers who were trying to cater to this growing urban middle class by creating music for them to listen to in their homes, the trick for them was to figure out how to capture the drama, the emotional expression of romantic music without a full symphony, without the sort of awe-inspiring acoustics of a performance hall. Let me play for you an example of a composition by Chopin to see if you think he was successful at still managing to capture that extreme emotion and drama of romanticism without all the bells and whistles that Berlioz had access to. And it goes on for several more minutes back to the original pace and fervor of the first moments of the fantasy impromptu that we heard at the beginning of this clip. Here we hear Chopin using only one instrument, the piano, to create in a 5-minute composition a very dramatic and moving piece that ranges from frantic and busy and disharmonious to meditative and quiet and lyrical through major shifts in tempo and intensity. It has almost a manic emotional quality to it that suggests fluctuations in feeling or in the pace of the day, while the title, an impromptu or a spontaneous fantasy, maybe makes us think of how our mind can wander from one thing to the next. How sometimes we jump from idea to idea and experience major shifts in feeling, or we're lost in thought, lost in our own imaginations, as the Romantics were interested in. These displays of new romantic music, whether in big concert halls or in bourgeois parlors, went on largely apart from the working class masses, who, now living in major urban areas, had brought with them the musical styles of the countryside that they were familiar with, that they were used to hearing. We see dance halls that played upbeat melodic music created by simple instruments such as the human voice and the guitar, becoming extremely popular and prosperous across Europe and the United States, by the middle of the 19th century. They were importing a musical style from the countryside, from the common folk, playing traditional and easily recognizable tunes that were appealing to workers and the lower middle class, who just wanted to kick back and enjoy their music without necessarily having to think too much about it. It was also a connector, a bridge, so to speak, between their agrarian past and their urban present, to have been able to bring with them the musical tradition that they had listened to in the countryside was extremely comforting to an audience that had experienced so much upheaval within the course of their own lives. In addition, we talked in earlier classes about the inventions of the 19th century changing the lifestyle of people in Europe and America. Well, it also changed the way they listened to music. Thanks to the invention of the phonograph in 1877 by our college's namesake, music became something that one could enjoy at home anytime you wanted, instead of something you had to go out in public to hear at a certain time and a certain place. When the player piano was invented in the 1870s, everyone could themselves even become a musician, so to speak, as the piano was mechanized and would automatically by itself play songs based on the cylinder that you could buy and insert into it. Here's a quick clip of some popular music from the 1880s being performed on one of these player pianos.
Okay, here's a piano roll medley. QRS word roll 2035, popular songs of other days, arranged and played by Lee S. Roberts. Of course, this roll is already from another day, so these songs are particularly old, but most of them, most people should recognize.
Composers like Chopin began incorporating popular and folk music traditions into the works they were creating for a more elite musical audience. In an example of the tendency we studied in Romantic and then Realist literature and art to elevate the experience of the average person, the language of the common man, to the realm of high art. In Chopin's body of work, these compositions are called polonaises, the French word for Polish. Chopin took the music of his people in his childhood, he was born in Poland, and used it as the basis for many of his romantic piano compositions, such as this one, his Polonaise No. 40. hear from this example, the Polonaise are rather melodic in nature, very consistent in terms of their tempo. Throughout this entire work, 3/4 time is maintained. That sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's the pacing of a waltz. Chopin got the idea for this composition and the Polonaise in general by listening to the type of music that his countrymen were hearing out and about in their everyday lives. At carnivals and fairs, at military dances, at the tavern, and he tried to introduce it to a French middle-class audience in their parlors where he was performing in general. As you can tell, these works are really very different from the overly emotional, dramatic compositions like his Fantasy Impromptu. And they have a lot more in common with the upbeat, danceable, popular piano music that we heard a moment ago when we discussed musical traditions among the so-called common folk. By the end of the 19th century, however, the devotion to the cause of raising up the style and traditions of common folks had, just like realist painting and literature, fallen out of style in favor of musical compositions that again were dramatic and emotional and shocking to their contemporary audiences. Many such musical compositions, including several of the works of the German composer Gustav Mahler, even went so far as to parody popular music styles, quoting them in discordant or dark passages, only to contrast them with the dramatic style and content of the high cultural music, which had reverted back to the style and content of the earlier part of the century. Your book mentions Mahler's tendency to do this, and I wanted to play you just a few seconds of his first symphony, where we hear the child's song Frere Jacques slowed down and elaborated upon, made really dark and foreboding, in a strange sort of quotation that reminds me of the way that end-of-the-century writers were looking at the darker side of bourgeois life, critiquing the middle class and their interests as frivolous in the face of a changing and troubled world.